Okay, so the next thing that we're going to discuss as part of Unit 5, we've discussed revolutions. This is going to continue with that, except it's going to be a different type of revolution. It's not going to be a revolution based on ideas or citizens' rights, kind of. This is going to be the Industrial Revolution where people are going to be advocates for themselves and they're going to demand better treatment, better wages, better hours. But this is going to look first at how industry evolved in the United States, and also I think it touches on Great Britain a little bit, but this is technically world history, so keep in mind that the dates, what you just talked about when we looked at the absolute monarchs, we looked at the English Civil War, we looked at the American Revolution, and now the French Revolution, this is going to take you through many, many different years. Okay, this is over, oh gosh, several decades. Okay, um, actually, looks like hundreds of years here that we're going off of now. So I know that's kind of hard to wrap your brain around that this is now a lot of material to cover, that this is not right after the other, but keep in mind, we'll kind of go through it. Don't worry. So first thing, age of industry. Okay. So let's see. All right. So the age of industry, this was known 1700 through 1914. During this age of industry, the reason it's nicknamed this is because of the technology innovations. So what happens is we kind of go from this simple, horse and buggy carriage to now everything is starting to get mechanized. So they're starting to have new technology. People still live off the land. There's still a lot of farming. Cotton is pretty much the main, is king at this point, and especially if you're talking about the United States, cotton is king. And then that area, through the agrarian areas, that none of that has changed. If you remember from your other history classes, and especially go over this in 10th grade history, the northern states are going to be known for industry and the southern states are going to be known for agriculture. So moving on, pre-industrial age life. Pre-industry, the infant mortality was approximately 33%. That's really high. Okay. Your life expectancy was around 40 years old. And I guess this is looking at Europe. Okay. Only 25% of Europeans were urban dwellers. Most people lived in small villages and every member of the family worked. Okay. This is a lot different than how it is now. Think about now. You can really tell the health of a country, or you can really, assume or infer that the country is doing very well, that they're very successful if they have a long life expectancy. So, for example, the United States, I mean, people are living until their 80s. I want to say the average life expectancy might be late 70s at this point in 2021, and the infant mortality rate is pretty low, which means that babies are being born and they're surviving, they're living. Um, and that means that you have access to things like fresh water, you have medicine, you have doctors, the mother is in good health. I mean, these are all factors that go into a baby's infant or mortality. Okay, so moving on. So the early revolution moved work by doing hand in home and replaced it with work done with power-driven machinery in factories. So one of the things that we mentioned is Adam Smith. Adam Smith was an economist, kind of like during this philosopher time period, the Enlightenment, and he talks about how previously there were apprenticeships where you would have to, pick a specific trade job, and then you would go and work under that person for, many years, and then at some point you would open your own business and it would just be you. Okay. Now, moving into this industrial age, you have multiple people, multiple workers in a factory who are now able to produce much more than what they could do with just one person. And because of this access to jobs, millions of rural villagers, they leave their home, they try to find factory work, and they get away from farming. So it says before the dawn, beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the 1700s, most people make a living by farming. The domestic system, so this is a system of labor in which industrial production took place in a person's home. So if they wanted to have their own trade job, and this was like, they had their job at home. Two examples of this, you have textiles and coal mining. Families were relatively small in the 1700s due to infant mortality, which is death, beginning high, and life expectancy being low. Villagers in pre-industrial times were captivated by travelers' tales because most villagers never ventured beyond their village's borders. Each family farmed land in several areas of a village, ensuring fair land distribution among farmers and economic protection against disaster. Village commons were used by farmers, so that's like a public area. They gathered wood and grazed their livestock. Poorer farmers raised crops. Pause. Sorry. Okay, sorry. Phone call. Next slide. Down. Down. Okay. All right, changes in agriculture. What you're going to see is there's going to be a second agricultural revolution. We still talked about these revolutions, these major change, these shifts from one way of life to another. Okay, that's what a revolution. So you have the enclosure movement, took away rights of British farmers, such as right to plant crops, right to keep livestock on unfenced private and public lands, and small farmers pushed off of common lands, which is actually kind of a good thing, because what would happen is a lot of these people would only use it to their advantage and not really care about the others, and it would ruin the lands for everybody. There are three features of the agricultural revolution, which is large-scale farming. You have crop rotation, breeding, and use of new farming tools. Now, any of you who have lived in Alabama for a long time, and you know some families who maybe your family has some land and you know a little bit about farming, you don't farm in the same field every season, because eventually the nutrients in that season will in that field will run out, and that means that you won't be able to grow anything there. So what happens is they will rotate the fields, but they will also rotate crops, because different crops require different levels of nutrients. So if you have something that requires a lot and you suck all of it out of the ground and then you try to plant something else, you can't do it. So this is where crop rotation comes in. And then breeding, you're going to breed animals. That way you can now have, available animals to, whatever you're trying to achieve. Okay. And there's also going to be an introduction of use of new farming tools, and that's going to help, farm the lands. The three keys to industrial success are known as capital, natural resources, and supply of labor. And the funny thing is, we're actually going over all of this in my economics course right now. So capital, that's going to be physical capital or even human capital. Human capital is the skills that you need. Physical capital is also any kind of resource, man-made resource that you're using to produce something. You have natural resources, which we say in our factors of production are land, which are natural resources, okay, any kind of natural something from the earth. It could even be an animal. It could be the field. It could be oil. It could be water. It doesn't just mean, land, okay? And then you also have to have a labor supply. So that means the people who are getting out there and working in the jobs are working the jobs and, farming the fields. That's your supply of labor. So capital, money to invest in labor, machines, and raw materials. England was a wealthy nation due to profits from large-scale farming, overseas trade, and the slave trade. They had enough disposable income to now rework their system to make it better. Your natural resources, harbors and rivers, they provided transportation and power, because you actually can have power through water. You've probably seen like a water wheel or something. You also have iron and coal, the principal raw materials of the Industrial Revolution. And from iron, you can make steel. This is known as the Bessemer process. And a funny thing about Birmingham, Alabama, for example, is they actually are able to produce their own iron in the city, because they have the main three ingredients that are all found in Birmingham. And we are very unique because of that. And we are named after Birmingham, England, because it is also an iron city. Coal is also a fuel. This is a natural resource. The problem of fuel for fire, usually it was wood. Britain had used most of its forest. However, coal was plentiful and it burned, but was a pollutant. Pollution in the London fog. So this was something where people were burning so much that eventually it has this big, dense fog that kind of came up on London, and it took some time to get off. Now, supply of labor, you have an increase in food supply due to agricultural advances. There are two important impacts: increased life expectancy and displaced farm workers. So that's a good thing. Now, ambitious entrepreneurs, they're the people who actually go out on a limb to start their own business, or they use their own investment to create something, okay? So they risk their capital and they set up what were known as industries. These people themselves brought together all three factors of production to create new industrial innovation or inventions. Village economics did not reach beyond the local area in pre-industrial times because transporting goods was hard and unprofitable. So early industries employed farm workers at slow times in the agricultural cycle because they wanted to work with glass, coal, iron, and clothing industries. So this is just, these are just certain things that they worked with. All right, so now we get into the beginning of change. The British textile industry leads the way. So when we say textiles, we're talking about fabrics, clothing, just materials that would go into making clothing or, curtains, any kind of fabrics, okay? So the law of supply and demand, this is getting into some econ. So welcome to economics. So you have demand for cotton cloth increases, okay? So here is our supply and demand, let me go back. Our supply and demand curve. Okay, so domestic system production could not meet demand. Investors created faster, more efficient machines to increase production. Landowners invested the money they made from the farming industry. The displacement of many farmers increased Great Britain's labor supply in the 1700s. All right, so what you need to know is that P is going to be your price, Q is going to be your quantity. So as you have to produce certain things, they are going to try to figure out what is the best or the middle ground here. They're going to figure out what is the best price for the quantity they're producing. And so this is where your lines intersect. And so this is where you will find equilibrium, and this is where you're going to actually set your price for the item that you're going to produce. Okay, iron and coal were Great Britain's natural resources that made up the principal materials of the Industrial Revolution. That's gold. Okay, but all right, 1733, we have John Kay, the flying shuttle. This is an advancement in weaving. Okay, weaving is used to create textiles or fabrics. And through this, it created a need for more yarn. So now in 1764, you have James Hargreaves, who creates what is known as the spinning jenny. It's an advancement in thread making. So we have this big machine here. It sped mechanization of the British textile industry. So they were able to produce fabrics a lot faster. In 1768, we have Richard Arkwright. He automated the spinning machine known as the flyer. And this machine was water powered and it sped mechanization of the British textile industry. So now we're getting, further advanced, I guess, and we're able to produce more and more textiles. So in 1779, Samuel Crompton, you have the cotton mule. He has used this to spin cotton faster. It is a finer thread and therefore it is a stronger thread, and it changes the textile industry. They produce much more thread than ever before. And again, this speeds mechanization of the British textile industry. And this is kind of an example of what that would have looked like. It's a big, loud room with a bunch of, fabric going. In 1787, Edmund Cartwright, he solves the problem, which is the shortage of weavers. His solution is going to be the power loom. This also continues to speed mechanization of the British textile industry. James Watts, he has a design for an efficient steam engine, and this ends the dependence of manufacturing on the flow of rivers. So that means now that these manufacturing facilities can be built anywhere. They don't have to be right next to a river, which really makes things a lot better. William Kelly and Henry Bessemer process, remember? So they developed methods for inexpensive production of steel and iron, and they met the industrial need for a sturdy, workable metal. Through that, we go into railroads and steamboats, and these two revolutionized land and water transportation. They lay the foundations for a global economy in the early 1800s. So this means that through this revolution, through the creation of these new technologies, you now have faster resources, so you can actually get your product to the consumer a lot quicker, which cuts down on your distribution costs, cuts down on your shipping costs. So that's more money in your pocket that you can actually hire more people, and therefore it just keeps going. Okay. And then in 1793, we have Eli Whitney. He is known as creating the cotton gin. Sorry. He speeds mechanization of the British textile industry. So therefore, you know, the cotton gin, the point of that was to get all the seeds out of the cotton, and this was kind of difficult. So through this, he was able to help clean it a little bit faster, and therefore, you know, time is money, okay? So the quicker you can get something done, the better it is. The factory system. So this is an organized method of production that brought workers and machines together under the control of managers. Movement of production into large buildings. So that means that they were no longer, you know, it was all together instead of just in your house. They now had a bunch of people who were trained in this one specific area, this unique trade, and they were able to then have separate jobs for separate people. They were able to produce more and more product. So they were usually set up near major waterways for power, and they also needed to transport the product to the companies wherever they were planning on selling it. They also needed more power, horses and water that creates steam. And in 1781, James Watts creates the steam engine. The growth of industry. Now, factories can be built in just about any place. Great Britain became known as the workshop of the world when the British industrialists set up factories in European countries. Industrialization proceeded slowly in France due to the French economy. Remember, they were kind of struggling there. They had just come from a revolution. You had Napoleon. He cost them a bunch of money because he had, you know, gone off in many wars, and they had finally had to settle between Britain and Russia. So they were still struggling a little bit, right? But it had been strained in the workforce, like I said, the Napoleonic Wars. Business practices are determined by individuals who own the means of production, and what we have now is our capitalist system, which is an economy set up where the government is not involved, not really. They might have some regulations, not at this point though. And then the entrepreneur or the people, the private sector, takes, you know, the main center stage, okay? So we have the assembly line. The product is moved along a conveyor belt from worker to worker, with each worker along the line performing a specialized task. If you can just picture that in your mind, I'll show you a video. We're also going to do one in class. Okay, so the assembly line, think of like the Mercedes factory. Each car, as it rolls down the assembly line, somebody adds a separate piece to it and it continues on. So you don't have somebody sitting there spending 2 to 5 hours making a specialized piece of a car. It is getting a pre-constructed, prefabricated piece, and each person, as it comes down the line, just installs it. And this is much faster. This is also better for production. You get a lot more money out of, you know, money for your products. Two forms of business organization that industrial leaders developed as production increased. They now start to create partnerships and corporations. And this is where you have partnership where like two people are, you know, creating the business or pursuing this business venture. And a corporation is where you have multiple companies who are involved, and they are part of a corporation. Two phrases of a business cycle known as the boom and bust period. So a boom, that means that you are now producing a whole lot of things. You know, your economy is doing really well. And then you might have a bust period. And this is normal in your kind of your flow of how your economy goes. So a boom period, everything's going, people are buying, people are selling, your money is being circulated. And then a bust period is where it kind of goes flat for a little while, okay? Now, when we get to the Great Depression, you'll see that that is even further than a bust period. That was just like the lowest, okay? Almost the lowest. Not good. Your telegraph, that is an innovation in communications, and it linked most European cities in the early 1800s because, like I said, we're looking at Europe and the United States. People learned to harness electrical power, which led to the replacement of coal as a major source of the fuel industry. We also have planes, okay, the development of airplanes, the Wright brothers, the Kitty Hawk, and other motor vehicles boosted the petroleum and rubber industry. More machines means more material to build machines. The demands for iron and steel increase. Advancements in steel production. More production means more to transport, and it also therefore started to create improvements in road making because people learned the value of a good road. Because, you know, think about it, you're on this bumpy road, you've got some glass bottles or whatever you're trying to transport, and depending on how bad the roads are, you may break your product and then you'll lose money. And that's money that you spent to get this stuff made. So people started to realize, hey, we need to do better about these roads. Maybe they could come talk to the city of Tuscaloosa. That would be really nice. Canals were dug, decreasing transportation costs. So that means that people were now able to get under bridges. They were used in the waterways. And so this really helped out a lot. In 1807, you have Robert Fulton, and he is kind of credited with the steamboat. 1801, Richard Trevithick. He creates a steam-powered carriage. He gets the technology from steam-powered locomotives, and this is all about efficiency. Each person has an individual task. This is what I was saying, that assembly line. No longer does one person make the project from start to finish. If you break the parts up, you can have it done quicker, which means that now you are able to get more for your money. So more return for the money that you put in. You're able to make more products quicker, which means you're able to sell things, and that means money in your pocket. Capitalism is strengthened because of industry. Now you have a new society. So this new society, the Industrial Revolution, allows people in poverty to achieve material success. The reason that people talk about the American dream so much is that you are not left out because of where you came from in your life. You were able to now move past the positions that you were brought up into. Other countries we saw had these caste systems or caste systems where you had levels and you were not able to move up in your life. If you come to the United States, you were able to now potentially get a good job. You were able to work hard, get your high school degree, maybe you go to college, maybe you get your certificate, and now you can actually move up in your position, make more money, have more things, okay? And so now you were able to achieve material success. People are also no longer self-sufficient. They rely on other people to do the job. New opportunities to move up. Like I said, this is the social ladder. It created a larger middle class of people. It increased the size, wealth, and power of the middle class. As family life in the middle class changes, men actually start to take on the role of the sole provider, and women start to be kind of like your stay-at-home. Well, not really stay-at-home, because that was their job, to take care of the kids. It was kind of expected at this point. You don't see a whole lot as far as women's rights go. But as middle class income rose, middle class women actually start to also hire domestic help. So they have people help them in the home. The working class is affected the most by this revolution. So what you're going to see is that the working class, the ones who are kind of the poor people who are actually in the factories working, they're going to be working long days, 12 to 14-hour days, 7 days a week, in very unsafe conditions, which means that they are, possibly hurting themselves. They might lose a foot. They might lose, have a hand stuck in one of the machines and lose their hand. Obviously, if they've got an open sore. And keep in mind, there were no such thing as sick days. There was no such thing as, hurt on the job. I need to go to the doctor. The doctor's, going to get a payment from my boss. That doesn't happen. There was no minimum wage. There were no child labor laws. So factories became known as sweatshops or slums because these people were literally working to death. Women's lives changed the most because they went to work. So at some point, the women decided, we're going to go get a job on our own. So they start to leave the home, and they were no longer centered on the farm and taking care of the farm. Now, people who worked in factories, they had a very hard life. Families lived together with other people who also worked in factories, and their lives were generally owned by the mill owner. He owned the factory, the homes, and the local stores. And this is where you look at the New York tenements. Okay. Now, what happens as a result is you start to see an increase in labor movements or labor unions. And a union is a association that forms to increase wages and better working conditions. Now, unions are good and bad. Okay, unions can be a good thing to the workers, but they can also be a bad thing and actually, stifle or, eliminate businesses altogether. To get what they want, they strike, picket, and boycott. They use collective bargaining to get what they want, which is what they work together for the same goal. The working class was excluded from the benefits of industrialization. Managers requiring workers to operate additional machines at a faster pace, which made working conditions in factories very dangerous. Another thing you need to know about this is there were also a lot of fatal diseases that started showing up, and this is where we eventually will start to see some vaccinations because of these, spread of disease. But public health conditions such as contaminated water supplies, they arise from industrialization, and they lead to diseases such as cholera and typhoid. And so you'd have what was known as typhoid fever. And even in textiles mills, you have pneumonia and tuberculosis. And I want to say, yeah, tuberculosis at this point was fatal, and I think it might still be fatal. I'm not sure. Don't ask me. I'm not a health person, but and that is that is it for our notes on the Industrial Revolution. I know I talked pretty fast trying to get this done. So you have your notes, and we will be doing some assignments and activities where you'll read a little bit more into the Industrial Revolution.